Hello, morning. Okay, now it's 10 a.m. Thank you very much for those join on time. Let's wait for maybe 2 minutes and then Dawn will kickstart the today's sharing. Okay. Yeah, I think 1 more minute, maybe Dawn we can just kickstart. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I saw we have a lot AI join to taking the notes.
Okay, well, we'll see what kind of notes they make, I guess.
Mm,
They should get something out of it.
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna roll ahead now.
Yeah.
And thanks everybody for coming. I'm gonna share my screen and roll right into it now. So today I want to talk about improving Sage 300 performance. And it's from the perspective of course of TaiRox. We're a somewhat unusual development company, heavily resourced with advanced computer science and mathematics degrees. And also programmers, I have one of my programmers wrote the first SQL Server driver for Sage 300 back when it was Computer Associates and then ACPAC International. Another of my programmers worked and did a lot of the heavy work on both the general ledger and then a couple of years later, order entry. So that's what we're coming from. We have been called in several times by people who are experiencing bad performance. Sometimes after one or two other people have been tried to fix it. And so I want to share our experience, things we've discovered that are easy to tackle and ways to approach the problem. So let me go right in. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about our best practice memos, and then I'm going to focus a little bit on networks and performance because that's where you're likely to get the most performance improvement. Of course, what I really want to talk about is TaiRox products, and I will get to that, but I want to cover the network aspect first. And it'll be in without a lot of IT jargon. And finally, I'm going to talk about the system we set up inside Sage 300 in early days that had 200 users on at the same time. How do you scale up to that kind of a system? And some of those techniques, of course, could be used for smaller systems. But I want to, people often ask the question, how high up can Sage 300 scale? Well, it has limitations, but a lot less than some people might think. Okay, best practice memos. If you go to our website, you will see on our homepage a link to best practice memos. A lot of them are about performance one way or another, and a lot of other things that you might find useful. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm going to mention one or two of the performance memos, but I'm not going to go into detail. There are more details in the document itself, and hopefully today I'll encourage, you'll be motivated to have a longer look. I only want to mention the memos briefly. One of the memos, you see these three graphs. They're the only difference between these graphs is 1 millisecond. 2 milliseconds versus 2.1 millisecond versus 1.9 milliseconds. And you can see if you have a lot of simultaneous requests. They all have the same response time. So response time is how long does it take when I have this many simultaneous requests? And you can see that once you get to a lot of users, a lot of simultaneous requests, something that might take 8 seconds and only 2 milliseconds difference, 10% difference, now it's 33 seconds. So what I want you to remember from this, I only want you to remember one thing. Small differences can have big effects. And this is true in Sage 300, it's true in any queuing system. It's why, for example, when you are after an earthquake, you can take out your mobile phone, but you won't be able to use it. You can't get a signal because the system isn't built for that much traffic. And so this is basic mathematical queuing theory. And but the only thing I want you to remember today is small effects small changes in performance can have big effects. The other thing I want you to remember, so that's point number one. The second point, number two, is when we look at performance in a network, it's quite common that we see people think, well, there's one problem. Maybe, but very often there's two problems. So there may be, in some sense, two bottlenecks, and I'm going to call them one a 7-second bottleneck and a 2-second bottleneck. So that's why 10 seconds is taking something that should take 1 second is taking 10 seconds. There's a bottleneck with 7 seconds and 9 seconds, and another with 2 seconds. For people with math degrees, you know that I'm fudging the numbers a little bit, but it's the basic result is. So that's the second thing I want you to remember. Often there's a primary effect and a secondary effect. If you look at the example I've given, let's say, for example, you spend a lot of time and effort and maybe money and do something like buy a brand new SQL Server box, and it only has a 2-second effect. So your average response time of 10 seconds is dropped to 8. They say, well, gee, we spent a lot of time and effort, and that hardly had any difference because there was the second bottleneck. And so what we'd encourage you to do is do a little bit of analysis, what I'll talk about later, and keep going until you get what you want or what you expect. If you look at it from the other point of view, if the first bottleneck, the 7-second bottleneck, was identified and fixed first, now you have something that did take 10 seconds and takes 3 seconds, and you say, wow, that was effort well spent, but let's stop now. We don't want to spend any more effort, ignoring the fact that it's still 3 times slower than it should be. So there's two principles. Little changes can have big effects, and there's often primary and secondary effects when you make a change or fix something. So what have we seen? What we've seen the most of is we're called in after somebody's done a disappointing effort because they've spent a lot of money on buying a SQL Server computer. This is often a secondary effect, which is perhaps greatly unexpected, but it is a significant improvement. It just needs to be combined with something else. The other thing that people buy is, let's get a solid state disk, it's much faster. Maybe, but remember, solid state disks, the network speed might be almost as fast as the disk speed now. So be careful how you consider that. Certainly it's worth doing, but it's more likely to be a secondary effect. What's more likely to be a primary effect is faster switches and network cards. I'm going to talk about 1 gigabit per second or 1,000 megabits per second switches, but we are in transition. And I know a lot of you are in finance, and as soon as people start talking about switches, you glaze over. So I'm going to try and talk about it in a way that we're just talking about common sense, but you don't have to know all the jargon. What we would say is, don't spend money first. The first thing you should do is analyze what's going on. Step 1, create a very simple network diagram. There's all kinds of tools that'll produce fancy network diagrams with pictures. This is a very simple representation of a very simple Sage 300 implementation. Sage 300 running on a workstation, going through a switch to a file server for the shared folder or for SQL Server. The path that is most likely to cause bottleneck is between SQL Server and the workstation. So that's something that we're gonna, that's all you have to know. Larger implementations, they may have RDP servers, especially as they get lots of user, it's easier to manage. Now the important connection is going to be between the RDP server and the SQL Server, and it may be going through one or more switches. So create a simple diagram, don't make it too fancy, and then what should you then do? And what we'd say is, it's pretty simple. Measure throughput. So ask your IT people, how fast is your network? If they say we have a 1 gigabit per second network, that's not the throughput. That's not how fast the network works. That's the theoretical highest possible speed you're going to get. In a typical Sage 300 network, you're not going to get 1,000 megabits per second. You're lucky to get 600 or 700. The other thing to do is, if you want to know how to improve things, the first thing we would recommend you do is find out what the current situation is. Take a few measurements when Sage 300 is slow. Take another few measurements when Sage 300 is fast. Measure the throughput. How do you do that? Well, I've used JPerf several times. It's a free tool. It doesn't install. You just run the program on one computer, run it on another one, and line them up. It's very, very simple to configure, and it will give you the throughput. So if you are, for example, if you supposedly have a 1,000 megabit per second network and you're only getting 80 milliseconds, you know something's wrong. If you don't want to use the tools like this, or your IT doesn't like it, easy way to measure, just copy a 4 gigabyte file from computer A to computer B, measure, say how long it takes, 30 seconds, do a division, and that's your throughput. So if you want to improve things, first thing to do is measure what you're trying to improve. Okay, here's some fixes that have worked. So these are quick fixes that have worked, and these are things we've seen. Perhaps the most controversial one is the first one, and that whenever we see this, if people will follow the advice, they'll get a huge boost. So don't have anti-malware, antivirus software running on your SQL Server machine. That may be a controversial opinion. I would say search online forums or ask ChatGPT for opinion, and you'll get some pluses and minuses. But I think the significant opinion is going to be it doesn't belong there. Now, okay, how do you deal with that politically? Well, our company has a policy that every computer has anti-malware installed. We would say the company policy should be any computer that is exposed to the outside in any way should have anti-malware installed on it. Another way of saying that is your SQL Server box should not be running an email client, should not be running Office, should not be running internet browsers. It should be secure. And then you have something that is going to perform much, much better. So what we've also said to people is, okay, you don't like this idea, or IT doesn't like the idea. Simple. Run Sage 300, see what the performance is like, turn off the malware, uninstall the malware for 1 hour, and run for 1 hour, and you'll see a huge difference. Now you can turn it back on, and now you can decide what you want to do long term. But that's probably the quickest fix that we've seen anywhere. If you're running any anti-malware SQL Server, don't do it. Some other quick fixes. If you're using voice over IP, your phone system is running over your network, and it has something called QoS, which stands for quality of service. And what that means is the voice traffic is getting priority over the data traffic. Sage 300 is running on data traffic, so you don't want to degrade the data traffic. So get it on a separate network. And we've literally seen situations where people are plugging their computer into their VoIP handset, and the VoIP handset is only 100 megabits per second, and it doesn't matter that their workstation is 1 gigabit per second. That's how they're connecting to the network. So beware of voice over IP. Something else, check the drivers. Some of the network cards, they're rated at 1 gigabit or 1,000 megabits, but they don't like to overheat, so that when things are a little slow, they put themselves into a sleep mode. It might be used, they might use some other term. And what that means is they scale back from 1,000 megabits per second to 100, and they don't go back up. And so they're actually running. And you see, that's why you actually want to measure things, because some of these effects will become obvious when you look at measurement. Something else, cables. What if you've got intermittent problems with your cable? Well, that can have big effect. Don't be afraid to get on your hands and knees and get down on the floor and see where things plug in. So, the cable's in the wall, that would be very expensive to redo it. We don't want to redo it when we're not really sure if the cable's a problem. If you have a suspect cable, okay, then get a 50-foot cable, plug it into the computer, run it along the hallway to the switch, and plug it in there, and see if that changes the throughput. If it does, then you know the cable's a problem and you might want to deal with it. Okay, I'm just about done with networks, hopefully. Switch specs. Oh, that sounds really technical. So what do you really need to know about a switch? Well, this is what a switch looks like. See here, there's the typically 24 workstations are plugged in on the left-hand side up here. That's called an access port, and then a 1 gigabit switch that will be running at 1 gigabit. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see that's the trunk port. This is the way that a switch connects to another switch. And this is, sorry, I'm getting somebody talking in the background, but this will be running much faster than 1 gigabit per second, because it's to connect two switches. What you should never do if you are going beyond a certain number of users and you need to buy another switch, never plug a switch into another switch's back, because then you're creating a for sure bottleneck. If you're deciding you're going to buy a switch and you look at different prices, what should you be looking at? Look at the spec that's the internal switching speed. Now, this just makes common sense. If you've got 24 wires going in and they supposedly run at up to 1 gigabit per second, then how that switches inside the box has got to be a lot faster. So it might be 5 or 10 gigabits per second. So check that out. So that's kind of all I want to talk about networks. Networks will be often a primary effect, and there's something you can do about it, and it can be practical and not that hard to understand. Okay, second section, settings and performance. I wanted to call out a couple settings. First one, your consultants you may be familiar with, especially if you're running order entry. to cost items either during day-end processing or posting. The costing of inventory items is very expensive in terms of network traffic, CPU traffic, and all kinds of other factors. So if you set it to run at posting time, it's going to degrade everybody. This is an example of probably the setting in Sage 300 that will have the biggest effect. So a couple issues. So again, if you're setting it up to do costing during posting rather than day end, change it for a day. See if it affects performance. Change it back if you really have to. And the question comes up, oh, well, we want to cost during posting, so the costing's always up to date. Do you really need costing up to date at the expense of good performance? You don't generate financial statements every day, probably. You might just do it once a month. So again, that will have often have a huge effect. Another effect, this would be a smaller effect, but remember, sometimes small changes have big effects. You can turn off Sage Advisor. You can search the Sage Community Hub, and it'll tell you how to do it. And again, is it really important for you to communicate with Sage how you are running Sage 300, or would you rather just turn that off and get some performance boost? So there's a couple examples of settings that we would recommend turning one off and turning one to be day-end processing. So I'm now going to talk about TaiRox products, and I'm going to leave this slide up. I'll have this slide at the end, so I'm just going to go through these products one at a time. FastDB Tools has a lot of functionality. It does a 5 or 6 times, sometimes 8 times faster DB loads, and it does something called reindexing. So what the heck is reindexing? Well, we've actually gone into installations, looked at their database, and seen that their Sage indexes are fragmented. What the heck does that mean? Well, again, we've got a memo that explains it in more detail, but this is what a balanced index tree looks like. And if I want to look up T, I have to look at one thing, go down a layer, go down 2 layers. If I go to see a U. With an unbalanced tree, I may have to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 layers. Each of these layers represents a chunk on the disk. So it's important to balance the tree. And this is something not a lot of people are aware of, but a DB load will balance the tree, but a DB load may be difficult. If you have a large database, it takes a lot of time. Of course, ours will save a lot of time. But I wanted to just to give you a quick look here. So this is FastDB Tools. It's got a lot of tools. I'm just going to cover a couple of things. So first of all, if you've got a consultant working in your environment and you've got, let's say you're doing a conversion and moving databases over, well, you can dump all the databases in one step. That'll save a lot of time, a lot of logging in and out. Or you can take a database and load it, and then load another one while the first one's being loaded. But what I want to show you is something that is often a primary effect. You see where it says reindex here. I'm going to look at this database and do some calculations. So what we're doing here is our program is feeding SQL Server a few parameters and telling SQL Server, please diagnose the fragmentation in all of the indexes in Sage 300. So you see there's 2,200 of those because there's 3 or 4 indexes on average for every Sage table. So There's no recommendation here because this is just a small database, but if I want to show all of the results. Now you can see, well, here's a table that's 50% fragmented, but it's only got 2 pages. Here's a table that's got 64 pages, but it's barely fragmented at all. So you can actually then click on reindex. Oh, that's true. All right, well, let's select all of them. And you can actually reindex while users are in logged into Sage 300. You can't do a DB load while users are in Sage 300. So this is an example of something that when you have a large database, this will have a primary effect if you have any kind of fragmentation. So I wanted to just show you that, you see, it's not that complicated. The memo explains it in more detail, but again, we're trying to keep the jargon and the mathematics to a limit. So that's what FastDB tools will help you do. Fast Clear History. Well, if you have lots of data, it's going to slow things down. The bigger tables get, the slower they get. It's more likely to be a secondary effect. It's not going to be a huge effect, but again, small changes can have big effects. So what's the problem? Well, when your database gets to be 5 gigabytes or 500 gigabytes or a terabyte, you can't run Sage's Clear History because it would take days. And that's, of course, why we wrote Fast Clear History. It does the same thing Sage's does, and then, but it does it much, much faster. So that may improve your performance a bit. And perhaps more importantly, you may have old data that's not that useful, especially stuff like orders and purchase orders. They may have, for example, old orders or purchase orders with items you no longer buy or sell. So is that data really useful? And maybe it would be, you'd be better off getting rid of or deleting those inventory items that you haven't used for 5 years, but you can't do it until you clear history. So a lot of these, again, this is more likely to be a secondary effect, but it's something you could do, and something we would encourage you to do is keep your data clean. Another way of deleting data, Productivity Tools has several programs, including programs that delete all of these entities and tables. And again, if you're not using an inventory item and you haven't used it for 5 years and you can't even buy it anymore, maybe it's time to clean things up and delete some of that old stuff. You don't have to delete your old financials if you want still some comparatives. And if you really want a lot of the old data, maybe it would be worthwhile making a copy of the database in case you have to look anything up, and then chop off and trim to the last 10 years or so. Again, there may be compliance issues that you have to follow. So that's something for you to decide. The other thing that Productivity Tools allows you to do is do many operations at once. For example, you can ship dozens or hundreds of orders at once, which often comes up when you're importing orders from an external system. Or the screen here shows you all of the changes you can make to dozens or hundreds of orders at the same time. So all of these programs do many operations at once. How does that affect performance? You might say, well, gee, doesn't that concentrate performance? Yes, it does, but you're not sifting through orders or purchase orders one at a time and incurring all of the user interface overhead. It's just doing the amount of work that it needs to do. So yes, it will slow things down a little bit for a while, but then it gets it over and done with. It also saves people time. Every time you save a few hours of an operator's time, that operator is free to do something else or even to investigate other kinds of things that could be done. So many operations at once can also be a way of boosting performance, especially if you plan it. If your performance is very good in the morning, update all the orders in the morning when it has very minimal effect, not in the afternoon when you've got lots of users and things have slowed down. So a little bit of planning can help you out as well as using these tools. Optional field manager. It's quite common for people to experiment with optional fields and add a few, try them out for a while, maybe don't completely implement them because some of the setup takes a while. Of course, optional field manager helps you with setting them up and giving them default values and so on. But often people find, gee, now that we've used optional fields, we realize we were using them the wrong way. Really, we want to get rid of them all and then redo it a different way. Well, optional field manager will get rid of them. Sometimes it's a primary effect, sometimes it's a secondary effect. The fact that you have lots of optional fields, especially ones that you're not even using. Collections. So our collections product is run by people who have one person doing collections 20% of their time. We have other customers who have 4 full-time people who do nothing but collections. And certainly part of the collections process is sending emails and following up with phone calls and so on. But a lot of people buy collections not just to do that, but just to send invoices, because you can, first of all, you can send the invoice, but keep a record of the communication in collections so that all of your communications are in one place. You don't have to hunt through email inboxes. So that saves time. The other thing is you can schedule this. So you can schedule sending of invoices so that's done every night at 10 p.m. or every morning at 2 a.m. And the same thing with overdue payment reminders, payment due alerts, statements, and all of these things that you see on the screen can be set up to be scheduled. Again, this is, in some ways you're saying, well, gee, this doesn't really improve performance, but what it does is it takes high impact performance and puts it at night when no one else is using the system. Similarly, download rates. Why do people use download rates? Well, typically because they may have 5 or 10 or 20 rates that they enter every morning by going to websites and then typing them into Sage 300. Well, you can schedule that activity, so instead of spending a half an hour in the morning, it's just done for you. That saves time. Perhaps more importantly, though, it avoids data entry errors, because once you type in a rate that's wrong, and once that rate gets used in a transactions, it's a real bother to get that fixed. Again, this is something that can be scheduled to be done at night. Fast data integrity. This has got very little to do with improving performance. And it's the fact that, I guess, we like the idea of clean data. Now, there are some odd situations where an integrity error can cascade and cause further errors. And what that can happen as a symptom, somebody will say, oh, 3 days ago, I couldn't post a certain invoice, so I just ignored it. Now I can't post any invoice 3 days later. What we would say is, it's important to check the quality of your data. We would say, why wouldn't you want to do that every night, every day, run it at night, check the integrity, have the integrity results in a PDF file, have that PDF file emailed to a notification list so you know as soon as possible if there's anything wrong. Why did we do this? Well, of course, again, once the Sage database gets to a certain size, you can't run the native data integrity because it would take hours or days. Why is that? They're repurposing the logic that checks the integrity of, I'll just use an entity, I'll just use customer, checks the integrity of the customer on the screen. And what that means is their integrity checker is pulling one customer at a time from the database, doing 5 checks against that customer, and then pulling in the next customer. What Fast Data Integrity does is for each of the 5 checks, it tells SQL Server, give me any of the customers that have this error. And so you can see that's why it's hundreds or thousands of times faster. And we would say, keep good quality data. Maybe it doesn't have a lot to do performance most of the time, but it's something we'd like to recommend anyway. Okay, I've got one more topic and then I'm going to throw myself open for questions here. So how do you scale up to 200 users? Well, if you've got lots of users, you're probably all running something like an RDP server because it's a lot easier to manage, upgrade, product updates, and so on. And so the key path is not now the workstation to SQL Server, it's rather the RDP server to the SQL Server, which might be running through 1 or 2 switches. So that's the key performance bottleneck you should be looking at. What can you do? Well, put them in the same physical computer. That means buy a server class machine. Maybe it's got 8 or 16 CPUs in it. Have it running 3 or 4 guest operating systems. In other words, SQL Server is one system with, say, dedicated 3 or 4 dedicated CPUs, and you have 1 or 2 RDP servers. They're their own dedicated CPUs, but running in the same physical box. Why is that important? Because it's in the same physical box. It doesn't go out to the network. There's something that's sometimes referred to as an internal switch. It's going to be 30 or 50 times faster than the network switch. Can you use this technique on a smaller installation? Of course you can. So that would be one way to scale up if you need to scale up. Another way that, well, we did this when we were initially getting ACPAC International running under Sage 300, replicate the database. Probably that may not mean much to a lot of people. If you're in IT, you know what I'm talking about. What this means is SQL Server will make a copy of the database every few milliseconds. And what is the advantage of doing that? Well, you can then report off the replicated database. Do your transactions on the, I'll call it the core or database, and that publishes, and the other database, the replicated database, you can do reporting. Because why does that have an effect? Because SQL Server, like most database servers, has 2 different modes, and switching between those modes is expensive. It sounds like a small effect, but it can be built up very heavily. One mode is for online transaction processing. In other words, you're adding an entry to an AR invoice batch. Online analytical processing, or OLAP, that's where you say, I'm generating an age trial balance. It's an analytical. And because you're avoiding the mode switching, as well as handling the load, that's another way you can scale up. The other technique is make sure you're scheduling activities to times when your system is not very heavily loaded. and training. Why do I mention training? When we scaled Backpack International up to have 200 users, what we observed was this. To post an order took an average of 5 seconds, but there were maybe 10-15% of the time it wouldn't take 5 seconds, it would take 15 seconds. So the mathematics behind that is a little bit complicated, but it's an obvious result if you talk to a math person or somebody who knows queuing theory. So how does training come into effect? If you press a button and normally something happens in 5 seconds and it takes 5, 6, 7, 8, oh, you might be tempted to press the button again. When things are already slow, trying to do the same thing yet again is going to slow things down further. So what we did was train people to say, press the button and then wait. Wait, make sure you pressed it, but then wait for a while. And that can have a very significant effect for a lot of users. So I think I've sort of got through the bulk of my presentation today, but I know there could be a fair amount of questions. So I thought I'd throw this up. These are the TaiRox programs I talked about. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah. Okay. So now it's Q&A time, right, Don?
Yeah.
Okay. So all of you, basically your mic has been unmuted. And then if you have any question, you can just unmute yourself, ask. And alternatively, you can also type your question in this meeting chat, will be much more easier. Yeah, okay. So let's see. So I guess, okay. Hi, where is the FastDB tool located? Okay.
Okay, so FastDB Tools, which I should have mentioned in my presentation, is one of 3 programs that you get with the product called Fast Database Management. So if you go to Fast Database Management, that one product has FastDB Tools, which is a lot of tools. It also has another program called Fast Database Management, which helps you smoothly copy databases from one office to another. This would be if you had a remote mine site or something like that. And then there's Fast Database Copy. This would be, I'm doing a migration to a new SQL Server box. How do I copy the databases the quickest possible way? So that's where you get Fast Data. It's part of Fast Database Management.
Yeah, so basically I posted the TaiRox website link in this chat. So basically to save time, right, we don't want every time we have the webinar, we just try to explain who is TaiRox, because a lot of attendees, they have attend our session before. So I just put the TaiRox website link in this chat, and all of you, you can take a look the product TaiRox has. Basically, TaiRox is an add-on to 6300. And honestly, I guess for today's sharing, like FastDB tool, all those database management, you will need the 6300 consultant to help you. So basically your partner, yeah. So that is so-called, my suggestion is after today's session, I will send the email to all of you and also include the recording link. So for those like potentially end user like me, like just handle the account function, not the IT person. So you can forward to your IT colleague, and also alternatively, you can just contact your C300 partner, and they will know how to work with us, work with TaiRox to help you. Okay. So we have one more question. Does integrity checker fix the integrity error?
And that's it's a real good question. And just gonna, yeah. So there is a when you buy Fast Data Integrity, you get two programs. One that's designed to be scheduled, and it doesn't do a lot of fixes. One is an interactive console, and you can do certain limited fixes. So here's what we're saying. I guess what we're not trying to fix. And a lot of what Sage does when they fix, it's making a judgment. For example, it says, well, the details in an AR invoice entry don't add up to the total in the header. What would its fix option does? It replaces the header value with the sum of the details. Is that the right thing to do? It might be, or maybe somebody who had access to the database deleted some of the detail lines. In other words, there's a judgment. Yes, it makes the error go away, but maybe you should find out what the real error is. So that's part of our resistance to fixing. The other aspect is, of course, to fix something in Sage, you would mean that you would have to go and use the Sage views, which are very slow. So our goal is not to fix. Our goal is to identify on an everyday basis, even on a large database, and properly communicate that, yes, you have problems. And to say fixing, we would recommend you get a consultant who knows what some of the inconsistencies might be and how to fix them, and do that. So we're after a practical way to do a daily detection of problems, not to fix them.
Okay, then SP have an additional question. Can we fix open record for integrity check?
So
In
can
the
we?
chat, yeah, so you are able to see the question, because you share your screen. Maybe you no
I'll
need to
stop
share the
sharing.
screen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
then
stop sharing.
you will be able to see the question. Can we
Okay.
fix, yeah.
Can we fix orphan records? So the answer is yes. So for people who don't know what an orphan record is, that would be, for example, you have detail lines in an order, but the order's gone. And so the detail lines aren't attached to anything. They're orphans. And so one of the options in Fast Data Integrity is to fix orphans. And what we'd say is this: if the orphans are old, they've been orphaned for years, there's no effect by getting rid of them, and you might as well keep your data clean. If it's the very first day that you detect there's orphan records, maybe you should figure out why, but before you actually delete them. But yes, one of the options, and I could probably call up a screen, but I won't bother. One of the options you can do is for the console is to delete orphaned records, because that's one of the things where if it's a long-term orphan record, it has no operational consequences. Getting rid of it.
Yeah. Just type, yeah. Any question, just type in the meeting chat. So I guess I learned, I was kind of surprised, right? Because every time last time I didn't, when customer feedback, oh, my 6300 is slow. A lot of time we will look at like, oh, your server spec. And then potentially say, oh, you should improve your server spec. I didn't, so far, I didn't very seldom actually touch. In fact, right, potentially your network setup and even your switch yes, sometimes we will touch a bit on like your potentially your internet, your bandwidth issue, but very seldom actually touch it, which actually is like your network setup. And also you should put your like RDP server together with the SQL server. So yeah, I think all these maybe sounds a bit of technical to the end user.
Yeah,
Yeah, but what I say is I think we will share this recording. And actually if you feel you face the performance issue, share the recording with your IT colleague or share the recording with your 6300 partner, and they will know how to reach out to us and then potentially can help you to identify what are the potential issue. Uh, in fact, just now, yeah, okay, we have one question coming. Currently, we encounter the speed problem in Sage. When we click the icon, it appear green bar loading take
yep.
time to open this. Okay.
So there's a few things. So what that means is, first of all, depending on whether your workstation setup or whether it's installed on the workstation computer or whether it's RDP. So if it's taking a long time, it's probably because I would guess you're using workstation install and you're pulling the files down from the file server. Now, is your file server the same computer as the database server? For a small installation, that's okay. The thing to watch out for, and maybe I should have said this in the presentation, is if you have a domain, make sure the domain server is not your SQL server. Probably not even your file server if that's where your shared folder is or your installation files are. So I'm sorry if that was throwing out terminology there, but if there's a recording, I'm sure somebody, a consultant, will know what I'm talking about anyway, for sure. But it's likely to be related to the domain controller, could be related to too much antivirus stuff, could be your file server is the same as your SQL server, or it could be look under your desk and see that, oh, we've got an old hub in there. We used to have a local printer. We don't use the printer anymore, but this workstation's still plugged into the old hub, and it's an old 100 megabit per second hub. So it's probably, okay, there we go. Yeah,
Yeah.
good. So what I'd say is measure it 1 to 2 minutes. Measure it when no one's on the system. Measure it when lots of people are on the system. Take a few measurements. Now you know what you're dealing with. So PJC can take a lot of time, and several aspects of it are nonlinear. In other words, there may be a big difference if your average number of projects per contract is 5 versus 55. So that's PJC is an example of something that may scale nonlinear with the number of sub entities. Again, I hope that's not too much gobbledygook.
Yeah. We have two
Well,
more questions come in. Yeah.
Yep. System becomes noticeably so. Separate server using the same module are not loading when logged in. Let's try a few more times. We are having several. Some modules are not loading when they log in. They need to try a few times and then see. So it sounds like there may be something wrong. Maybe you need to check that the programs have been properly registered. That's just a wild guess, and wild guesses are almost wrong, but you can make 3 or 4 wild guesses and maybe one of them would be right. How about backup? Again, backup program, good. FastDB Tools comes with a backup program. Again, it can be scheduled and it can be scheduled to run at night.
Okay. So then Evelyn have a question. We are having separate server for DB and Sage program. User experience some module are not loading when logged in. They need to try a few times, then able to see all module. May we know what is the reason?
Yeah, something seriously wrong. I mean, that would be the some modules are not loading. That doesn't sound right. That sounds like something's horribly wrong. That's why I said maybe there's some problems with registering the programs. You need to get a consultant in and check your installation. We have a program on our website called Install Check. It's free. It doesn't require a license. It doesn't install, so it doesn't affect your environment. You just bring it down, run it, and it will document your Sage 300 environment. So that might tell you a few things that are typically wrong. There's got to be something horribly wrong for either that or I may be misunderstanding your description.
Okay, so we answer the backup program. Can it be auto backup, right? I think it can, but right?
Yeah, yes, you can schedule it. That's the main purpose of it.
Yeah. And yeah, I will post even I post the image in TaiRox website, right? There is a free diagnostic software installation chat. Maybe you can try that one to see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left. So yeah.
And since we got 3 minutes, I'll just go quickly and maybe share my screen again.
Yeah.
And just show you. If you go to our public website and you go to downloads, this is the install check download. It's free. It doesn't require a license. It doesn't and it'll do things like do a huge analysis of documenting the environment or checking for problems. You can also run regex and do various other things. So if you run it and you see things in red, that means there's a problem or potential problem. One of the things you might have if you're running into module difficulties, maybe you've got multiple versions of Sage 300 installed on your system. So that's another wild guess. But install check will document that. So that'll alert you to some of those things.
Okay, so we have a question. Okay, what is the lowest version that TaiRox software will support? I think it's a 2012, right, Don?
For most of our products, it's 2012, yep, 2012. For collections, it's 2018 and to 2026. So 2018 to 2026. So it's the same program runs on multiple versions of Sage. So it just adjusts itself to any differences. Of course, there isn't much difference between 2012 and 2026 anyway.
Yeah. Okay, maybe I ask one last question because I saw a lot of attendees feedback, right? So I think report printing is very slow. And based on what I learned just now, basically there is a two potential way. I don't know whether I try to catch the your presentation correctly. One is try to re-index, right? Re-indexing
Yep.
might help the report print because you go down like the find the information faster. Okay. Then another one is you really have a lot huge report. Potentially, actually, you can replicate the database, that particular database just for report generating. Am I right to say that?
Yes, but that would be a technique that you would need a good SQL Server person who knows how to set up a replicated database and all of the things that go along with it. And it would be for a larger installation. Certainly, if you've got SQL expertise, you can. It's an approach you can take.
Yeah, then for normal user, potentially can speak to 6300 partner or consultant, try to see whether can reindex the 6300 DB. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, and they can do that either with FastDB tools or by doing a DB dump and DB load with Sage as product or with FastDB tools, or they can do it in SQL Server. But the SQL Server method, there's a lot of tricky parameters that would be head scratchers. And that's why we put it in FastDB tools, so that we're driving it with parameters that make sense for Sage 300 and people don't really need to understand.
Okay, so yeah, 1 minute past. So thank you everyone for attending today's session. Watch out the email. We will share the recording and also the presentation slide. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dong.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Bye.